This case boils down to one question: who was in control? In this case, when you step back and look at all of the evidence that you've heard over the last few weeks, you get clarity. What happened in the years, months, weeks, and ultimately what happened down in that basement on August 12, 2024 was not chaos. It was not confusion. It was not a tragic misunderstanding. It was not a best friend merely helping out her other best friend in the whole world. This was control. And the person who was in control during that entire time frame sits at that table: Meggan Sundwall. The judge instructed you on credibility, and that's in instruction 19. I won't read over it entirely again, you just heard it from the judge, but when you evaluate the evidence, use your common sense. Look at all these factors in instruction 19 and your human experience to determine credibility. You look at whether things make sense in real life. You ask, does the story match the evidence? Do behaviors and patterns match human experience? Do certain patterns match what we've heard or learned about during testimony? When you apply those rules here, the evidence does answer one central question: who was actually directing, controlling, and causing what happened to Kacee? The answer is Meggan Sundwall. Let's talk about Kacee. What do we know about her? First, let's be clear about something the state is absolutely not running from. Kacee lied. She exaggerated illness. She misused medication. She made some poor decisions. Both sides, I think, can agree about that. She was a flawed person. She was a hurting person. The evidence shows, though, that she had real medical issues from early in life. She was only born with one kidney. She had surgery, I believe we heard it at like 3 weeks old from that. She was exposed to long, early medical treatment. She lost her mother as a small child and her father as a teenager. Over time, she learned that medical crises brought attention, care, and connection. Much of her dishonesty centered around health. That context matters not to excuse her behavior, but to understand her vulnerability. Even with the cancer lie, let's look at that, because she certainly did lie to many people about that. She lied to her family. But with her family, they were actually seeing objective factors, objective things that made parts of her story seem believable. Medical supplies were being delivered to the home. She had a port. She had real infections associated with that port. She had legitimate knee surgery and physical therapy. She went to appointments and emergency rooms and other doctors. Now, the family are not medical professionals. They were trying to make sense of what they were seeing and what Kacee had told them. And she had not told them the level of dramatic lies that she told to Meggan Sundwall, who is a nurse. The defense has suggested throughout this trial that Kacee's life was collapsing, that she had built this house of cards and it was falling, that she was part of a drug network, stealing money and facing exposure that gave her a real motive to end her life. But the actual evidence does not support a sudden house of cards falling. Her prescription records show In the early, I mean, what you'll see, you can review it. In the early years, yeah, she may have been doctor shopping a little bit. She was going around getting opioids from different sources. We heard from Dr. Masteller that it was harder for doctors to check the Doppel records at that point to see if that was happening. But after that, what we see is what Dr. Masteller testified to. Pretty routine opioid prescription. I think you'll see in that exhibit, it's monthly. Dr. Masteller talked about that, and he talked about that they even had a plan to wean her off of that. And then at the end, when the defense asserted that it really ramped up at the end, she had a knee surgery. And Dr. Masteller testified that that's consistent with extra pain management that would have been needed for the knee surgery. You heard from her knee surgeon as well about the extra opioids he prescribed her at that point. Yes, there was evidence that she was trading pills with other people. She was using medication that she wasn't prescribed. But the medical examiner and toxicologist were clear. The drugs in her system on August 12th did not cause her death and did not meaningfully interact with insulin. They alone would not have been the cause of her death, and they don't interact with insulin. There's also evidence that Kacee may have been taking money from her grandparents. Even assuming that occurred, there is no evidence that she had been confronted, investigated, or was facing imminent consequences because of that. Family members testified. Mark said that he certainly would have sought repayment. He would have had a firm conversation with her about it. But he would not, initially at least, want to see criminal punishment unless it was, needed to get that repayment. We heard from her ex-husband, Kacee, and he testified he consistently helped her out financially. He bought her cars, he bought her clothes, he paid for the tires on her cars, he paid for insurance. He testified he would have continued to help her out financially. In fact, the evidence shows that Kacee was actually quite generous with her money, particularly with the defendant. We heard testimony from both Kylie and the defendant's own mother, Renee, that Kacee had paid for, and I believe even her father, Lee, that Kacee had paid for a trip to Disneyland for Renee's 60th birthday. And you'll see, and you've seen in the text, that the defendant is giving, that Kacee was giving the defendant hundreds of dollars shortly before her death. This is not evidence of someone whose world is collapsing overnight. This was Kacee's life as it had been for years. Messy, complicated, imperfect, but certainly stable enough that she continued planning surgeries, planning to escalate up in work, and daily activities. Flaws do not equal suicide. Chaos does not equal an intent to die. And most importantly, vulnerability does not give someone else the right to take control of whether someone lives or dies. Also, Kacee was not acting like someone determined to end her life. You heard the testimony just 2 weeks before August 12th, 2 weeks and 6 days. She underwent knee replacement surgery. Dr. West, the surgeon, he testified about performing that surgery and how he evaluates patients before such a complicated and extreme surgery. He evaluated not only her physical condition, and we know that Kacee was not lying about this because he testified, no, the x-rays showed that her knees were in severe condition, and one was worse than the other, and that's the first one that he operated on. But he also evaluated her mental readiness for such a surgery, whether she had the motivation to recover, adequate support at home, and the ability to follow through with rehabilitation. She met those criteria, and he testified he would not have operated had she not. The evidence shows that Kacee was healing on schedule. She attended her 2-week follow-up appointment about a week before August 12th. She was completing physical therapy. She was on track. And the doctor testified that they were already discussing, although it hadn't been formally planned, he said that at the 6-week follow-up, they were going to talk about doing the second knee, and that was her wish, if the recovery continued as expected, which nothing indicated that it shouldn't. Kacee was making plans for her future. Mark testified about how she talked about advancing at work and wanting to get a license associated with that. She talked about getting healthier. Mark testified that she had purchased a treadmill. She was trying to lose weight. And in fact, in the body cam, you'll see it. Mr. Williams even talked about it. There's a treadmill in front of her closet that the officers had to move to get access to that closet. She talked about wanting her own apartment, that she was unhappy living with her grandparents and wanted to get an apartment. You'll see in Exhibit 163 here, she expressed fear of pills being laced with fentanyl because fentanyl can kill a person. About a month before her death, she obtained a new car. We heard from Kacee Tanner, her ex-husband, who helped her finance that. I'll ask you to remember, and again, some of these slides, some of these exhibits that have been introduced and that you've seen, I'm going to show you on the PowerPoint. Some I'm just going to refer you to, and you'll have it back to consider in the jury room. But remember Exhibit 17. The day before Kacee died, part of the searches that she was looking for, it looks like she's online shopping. She's looking at Lululemon items and lunch pails. In Exhibit 34, we see her shopping list. On August 11th, she went to Smith's. In addition to buying some treats for the defendant the next day that Meggan talked about in her interview with police, she purchased frozen pizzas, dog treats, and a car freshener. These are ordinary, future-oriented purchases, not the actions of someone planning to die within hours. Exhibit 35, there's the receipt for those items. She also had her dog Bella, whom multiple witnesses said that she treated like a child. There is no evidence that she made arrangements for Bella's immediate care after August 12th. Excuse me. You heard that she sometimes portrayed her family as emotionally abusive. And for sure, we heard that Meggan and Meggan's family, they heard that Kacee did not have a good relationship with her family. They would not let her come live with them. They were emotionally abusive. They talked down to her. But the testimony from Kylie and Mark showed something different. Actually, a pretty close family relationship. Regular contact, shared events, and continued support. And despite all that speculation, you have heard there's no suicide note, no goodbye messages, no indication from anyone to anyone that she intended to die. If she actually had a good relationship with her family, which testimony supports, despite her telling other people that she didn't, would she leave those things? Her conduct in the days leading up to August 12th shows planning for life, not preparation for death. Instead, what you see is a person who sought attention, particularly from the defendant. Even the defense's own expert, Dr. Hancock, acknowledged that pattern. Kacee told dramatic stories. She exaggerated, primarily in medical contexts. Dr. Masteller confirmed that. And over time, those stories, and again, primarily to Meggan, became more extreme, more implausible. And again, Meggan is a trained nurse and would have knowledge. Yes, in the text, which again, you'll have plenty of time to review all of those, you will see, or the ones that were admitted, excuse me, you will see Kacee talk about suicide and supposed prior attempts that she made at suicide. But when you look for believable, decisive action by Kacee alone, not just dramatic claims about something obviously not true, the kind of action that is actually taken by someone truly determined to die, you will not see it. She had access to insulin. You'll see that in the text. We've heard testimony about it. There were many diabetics in her home. There's different types of insulin. It's not inventoried very well because Mark said he would never throw out, otherwise usable insulin, even if it's expired. She could have killed herself with insulin at any point. The defense made quite a point of demonstrating that she had access to very large quantities of opioids. She could have overdosed on those at any point. And again, she expressed fear, even of pills, even if she's trading pills, and even if she's taking pills that she's not prescribed. She's still afraid that they might contain fentanyl. She could have gotten pills with fentanyl and died much easier that way. And evidence shows that she repeatedly described to Meggan over text how painful and frightening she thought death from insulin would be. Hours of declining consciousness, seizures, organ failure, and particularly what she described to Meggan as her not wanting to die this way, drowning in her own fluids, which is exactly what we hear happened. Instead of real attempts, you see exaggerated claims. For example, in Exhibit 82, she tells Meggan, again a nurse, that she injected 9 full bottles of insulin. This is something that Meggan apparently, quote unquote, believed. You heard testimony that insulin is measured in units and that a single vial contains about 1,000 units. Dr. DeSalvo testified that as little as 38 units could be fatal for someone of Kacee's weight. You heard in Exhibit 60, this is a text from Meggan. Meggan herself told Kacee way back in 2020 that 100 units would be lethal. 100 units ought to do it. Yet despite these dramatic statements from Kacee, which you'll see pretty consistently, what you also see consistently is hesitation, delay, escalating stories without follow-through, over years. And all the while, Meggan is supposedly believing them. Again, she's a nurse. Dr. Hancock, the defense's own expert again, agreed that someone with these patterns, he talked about lying, this behavior of splitting, where you're telling something to one person and something to another person and then trying to prevent them from interacting, going to extremes for attention and care. He said, yeah, that person could be very vulnerable. That person can be someone who can be exploited by others. The defendant was a nurse. She understood the vulnerability. She knew the lies. She recognized the control she had over Kacee. And yet she didn't treat this as a mental illness. There's no evidence that she pushed for therapy. She did not even confront Kacee about what she knew were blatant falsehoods. Think about that. I took 9 vials of insulin. At another time, I took 4 vials of insulin. I've taken all the drugs that I have. I just can't die. My body doesn't accept drugs. Meggan doesn't call her on any of that. She's just accepting what she as a nurse would know is pretty absurd. Instead, Meggan used it. She treated it as an opportunity. What the evidence shows here is a pattern, a long-running game of chicken. Kacee escalates the dramatic suicide talk. Meggan pushes the conversation further. More early on in the text, and again, you'll review them, Meggan sometimes does say, Kacee, this decision has to be yours. I only want to do it if it's your decision. But as time goes on, the text shows that Meggan increasingly encourages insulin use and pushes toward action. And again, the text show that Kacee is deflecting. For years, nothing actually happens. Kacee never commits suicide. Kacee's never dead. Kacee makes extreme, often, like I said, patently unbelievable claims about suicide attempts, but she does not carry one out. The evidence supports that, particularly in the early years, Meggan's goal was to encourage Kacee to die on her own. Meggan probably did not want to have to kill Kacee. If Kacee killed herself, if Meggan could convince Kacee to kill herself, that would certainly be easier. It would be cleaner. It would be more convenient. You see that encouragement clearly. Let's look at Exhibit 48. And this is in 2020. Meggan says, there's nothing left for you here. You have to go. You have to let go. It is past time. Remember Exhibit 49. You have so much more on the other side. Exhibit 61. Oh, sorry. Exhibit 48. Yeah, this is what I just referenced. There's nothing left here for you. Everything is ahead of you in the next life. Move forward and stop existing. Exhibit 61. Again in 2020. Are you doing insulin tonight? Meggan asks. Remember Exhibit 60. 100 units is enough, and it's not even detectable in an autopsy. Meggan tells Kacee that back in 2020. Meggan even brings insulin home from work back in 2020. Remember and review when you go back to deliberations, Exhibit 62. Meggan says, you didn't use insulin last night. Are you planning on it? Remember Exhibit 63. Are you planning on using the insulin? Exhibit 65. Should I take the insulin back? Because she had drawn it up and put it in the fridge. And remember Kylie's testimony. She remembered seeing it there. This is when Kacee was moving out of Meggan's home and said that she was afraid of Meggan doing something to her. And Kylie said, yeah, I saw a vial of insulin in there. That's backed up by the defendant's own statements. Let's look at Exhibit 66. Meggan is saying, there's still shots in the fridge. I drew them up for you and tried to get you to take them. It's on the third text down. Even then, Kacee is hesitating, delaying. Remember Exhibit 67. Kacee says, I was going to do it last night, but I fell asleep, probably tomorrow. Remember Exhibit 62. Kacee explains that she's just not ready. She wanted to talk to Meggan first. She feared missing Meggan. And she said, I just need to do it and get it over with, but I have all these attachment issues. Dr. Hancock testified that people with these patterns, again, are seeking attention, care, and reassurance that their life has value. Yet Meggan does not redirect her toward treatment. Instead, she continues the conversation. Exhibit 51, Meggan asks, what do you have to live for in this life? I truly believe everything for you is ahead of you, not here. I felt that way for a long time, more strongly as time goes on. Over time, it's becoming clearer to Meggan, even despite all this encouragement that Meggan is giving her, Kacee is not going to do it. She's not going to do it alone. So Meggan begins offering direct help. Let's get to 2021. Exhibit 52. I will come over and help you do them. I'm happy to come over and help you if you are really ready to be done. Exhibit 53. I don't think you will. And then she says something. She says, something's holding you back. Do some soul searching and figure out what's holding you back. When you are actually ready, you let me know and I'll be there to help you. You won't be able to do it alone. Meggan herself, way back in 2021, knew that Kacee was not going to do it alone. Meggan understands the dynamic. Remember Exhibit 70. Meggan suggests drawing up everything you've got and giving it through your port. And then she again asks, do you want me to come over and do it? Still, we see Kacee stalling. Remember Exhibit 72. Kacee's delaying again. She says, oh, I was going to, my nurse was coming over, then I needed to take Bella out, then I fell asleep. And still we see Meggan pushing harder. Exhibit 133. Honestly, this is Meggan to Kacee in 2022. Honestly, I think with the insulin, someone, should probably be me, should stay with you and continue to give you doses so it will actually stay low and you can pass. Ladies and gentlemen, this message marks a turning point. By 2023, the pressure still continues. Remember Exhibit 98. Meggan asks, are you wishing you went through with your plan? Remember 55. I really, really want to be be there with you when you pass. Exhibit 54, Meggan's talking about wanting to be present and she's even coordinating the timing around childcare. Kacee again hesitates. At this time she says, it does not feel right. Go look at Exhibit 54 and see that. Meggan again, she does say, this is Kacee's choice, this is your choice, but again, never therapy, never intervention, never ending the conversation, never calling Kacee on what are increasingly dramatic and outlandish lies. By 2024, the dynamic really intensifies. The stories become more bizarre, more absurd. Remember Exhibit 81. Kacee, and this is a long exhibit, and I invite you to go through all of it. This is where Kacee is inventing this hospice. She's inventing multiple nurses that are coming over and doing different things. And if you'll remember with Dr. Masteller, I took some of these vital signs that these supposed nurses are communicating to Meggan through Kacee's own phone during this fake hospice. Dr. Masteller, again and again and again, nope, these vitals are not real, they don't make sense, they're incompatible with life. And every time I asked him, would you expect a nurse to know that? Yes, 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 yes. Even Dr. Hancock, again, the defense's expert, he said he's not a medical doctor, and that's to be fair, but even he said some of these vitals are highly suspect. And yet Meggan continues to play along. She even responds, it's a total mystery when she sends her some kind of vital, and pretending to be a nurse, she says, hey, have you ever seen vitals this low? Even the doctor's confused. Meggan, it's a total mystery. Instead of challenging the obvious fabrication, she sustains this suicide narrative, and the pressure continues to escalate. Remember Exhibit 58. Meggan tells Kacee, Easter would be a beautiful day to die. Remember 100, Meg says, it would have been a good day for me to come and help you with the insulin. Remember 57, go Case, don't look back, go. Remember 101, Meggan asks about obtaining insulin and transferring prescriptions. Because Kacee says, oh, the pharmacy's out. Again, delaying. The pharmacy's out, they can't get it. Meggan goes, well, see if they can transfer pharmacies. Exhibit 96, Meggan proposes trying insulin the next day. And I'll show you Exhibit 135. And here we're up to June of 2024, just a few months before August 12th. Case, can you get the insulin? They are keeping you off for 48 hours, let's try it. I'll come and help you and give it to you regularly and see if it works. Again, that message deserves emphasis. Remember Exhibit 88. Meggan says, if that doesn't work, I think we should get the insulin. I'll come help you. Exhibit 77. She insists that if they try insulin, she wants to be there to help administer it. Meggan is not letting the topic go. And in fairness, Kacee is continuing it going on too, and she's getting more and more dramatic, and she is talking about suicide, but not in a believable way. And what you'll continue to see is delay and putting her off. After Kacee's knee replacement, which we know happened July, I believe, 23rd of 2024, Meggan starts trying harder to gain physical access to Kacee, because at this time, she spent years encouraging Kacee to do suicide. Kacee's even having pretended to have tried and nothing works. So Meggan starts to think and know, I've got to be there. I've got to be physically present for this to happen. Remember Exhibit 91. Kacee, having just had a knee surgery, instead she does lie to Meggan. She says that she shattered her femur. She says that one of her hospice nurses picked her up and dropped her, and this shattered her femur to explain her leg. I think she even sends a picture of it. She's not telling Meggan that she got a knee replacement. Remember Exhibit 92. Meggan, because Kacee had been in the hospital with the knee surgery, Meggan offers to come to the hospital and again says, I'll help you with insulin. Exhibit 99. Here, Meggan is talking to one of these fake hospice nurses or doctors, and she says, I know she doesn't want anyone seeing her this way, but I feel like I need to come and see her, again trying to get physical access. And here again, we see that Kacee is delaying and deflecting. I think I would wait a little while and let her sleep, and then when we do a shift change, we can talk to her and have her get a hold of you and see if that would be okay. Would that be okay with you? In Exhibit 102, now we're up to July 26th of 2024. Meggan, do you want to try the insulin? Kacee, again delaying. I do, I just don't want to do it until after I talk to Masteller tonight. And again, Masteller is her real primary care physician, but you'll see in Exhibit 81 that Kacee is also pretending that Masteller is coordinating this hospice care, that he's the hospice doc. We heard from Dr. Masteller that obviously no such thing actually happened. Still, Exhibit 102, Meggan says, do you want me to try and come and help you tomorrow? Kacee, again deflecting, delaying. I'll let you know after I talk to Masteller tonight. Exhibit 132. Meggan, again, we're end of July 2024. No, you just asked me to help you today, which you've done several times, and I plan on coming to help you and end up waiting all day to hear from you, and you never do. It is just frustrating sometimes. I'm not stressed, but I'm sorry you are. But she sure sounds stressed, frustrated that this is not helping. She keeps waiting for Kacee to give her a day. And then she says, and put a star next to this one, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think you want to try to off yourself, and I completely understand. So shortly before, here we are, July 27th, 2024, she's even saying she doesn't think Kacee wants to kill herself. I'll show you Exhibit 76. Here we're to August 5th of 2024. Here's where you and I differ the most, I think. And it's the same with Mitch. You two are actually so alike. Your focus is on the now. Like you want relief now. Whereas I was focused on doing the insulin because it's a long-term solution. Not just for the now. You need a permanent solution, Kacee girl. Exhibit 94. And again, we're in August of 2024. Meggan, last night you asked me to think about what I thought you should do. Do you remember that? Kacee, did you come up with a plan? Amber's here, and you'll see in Exhibit 81 that Amber is one of these fake hospice nurses. And she's just getting stuff set up, but I'm hoping you came up with a plan so you could tell me before I fall asleep. But who knows, I might not fall asleep because yesterday I didn't. Meggan, my thought was give him until Thursday night. And if you still don't have a plan from him, and again, you'll see in Exhibit 81, this is this surgery. This is this fake surgery that Dr. Masteller is supposedly coordinating to fly up to Washington. They're going to do a surgery on Kacee that makes her body able to accept medications better so that she can then come back and kill herself. A doctor and a hospice team is supposedly setting this all up for Kacee, and Meggan is going along with this. Except she's not really. She said, well, let's give him till Thursday night, and if you still don't have a plan, let's try insulin over the weekend. She's not calling her on how this surgery is absurd, that a hospice and doctors are not going to do that surgery is probably not even possible. She just says, okay, yeah, well, let's give it till Thursday, and then we'll do insulin. Exhibit 105. Here we're to August 9th, 2024. Meggan pushes again. What do you have to lose by trying insulin? You didn't pay $900 for it, which is a huge blessing. Exhibit 106. Kacee gives this very long explanation that I won't read verbatim, but you can review it. Another delay tactic, something about Masteller, and he's gonna try to figure this out, and I'm just trying to figure out what to do, and last we talked, and all the scheduling problems. She's putting it off. She's putting Meggan off. And Meggan again says, I said that we'd give him until Thursday, and if he didn't have a date for surgery scheduled, then we'd try insulin. Again, August 9th, 2024. Meggan is converting talk, drama, lies into action. Remember Exhibit 136, and this is a long one, so I invite you to spend time with it. Kacee says she wants to make sure that she gets everything ready. And this is, this is August 10th, 2024, so now we're just 2 days before the event. Meggan responds, hey, I'm not trying to pressure you, I'm just trying to help you think through things, but consider the tone that we're seeing in the messages I've shown you today and in the ones that you'll review back in deliberation. Consider the tone and frequency of these messages from Meggan. Is it true, especially throughout 2024, that Meggan's not trying to pressure her? Kacee explains that she does not want to upset Dr. Masteller. Again, that's not real because Dr. Masteller, he's just her primary care doc. He's not scheduling this surgery. She says that she does not want to upset Meggan, which I submit to you is true. She's very concerned about upsetting Meggan. But then, very importantly, she says she will begin drawing up the bottles. At this point, suicide talk has gone on for years without decisive action by Kacee. Meggan knows, as we saw in that text, Kacee's not going to do it alone. So what does Meggan say? Again, in Exhibit 136 that you'll have to review. I could make it work today, tomorrow, Monday even. You just tell me when. And you don't have to draw it up all yourself. I would come and help you. In Exhibit 136, we finally move to August 11th, the day before the overdose. Kacee says in here, second line of the first text, I spent most of the night drawing up the insulin. This detail matters. Even after saying she's prepared the syringes, though, she immediately goes back to delaying again. The very next message, my grandpa's in town, my family's coming over, so we do it either later or today. I didn't know we had family coming over. I can't go upstairs with my leg like this. The next message, I'm thinking we need to wait a little bit since my grandpa's brother and family are coming over. I just want to know if you're okay with that. She's putting it off. She's giving reasons why Meggan can't come over. Meggan responds, hey, we can do it later today. Tomorrow would be a bit more challenging just because of the car situation. And again, Kacee's trying to put it off. Okay, hopefully they won't stay long. It's Kylie's birthday. We're going to be having dinner, birthday cake and stuff, and they're all here. Hopefully they'll be gone. Do you want me to just keep you updated? And then again, importantly, Kacee says, I have everything ready. Now I'm getting irritated because I don't have meds for Masteller, so I feel horrible. I want to do it and pray it works. I just wish Kylie could get off of work sooner because the rest of the family are here. They are just visiting while we wait for Kylie's family. Delay, deflection. But saying that, yeah, she spent most of the night drawing up all the vials. She has everything ready. Meggan becomes irritated. That probably won't work. That's lots of relying on other people. I can see if Mitch can work from home and my dad can watch Porter tomorrow. I'll have to see about my dad, though. And then at this point, Kacee says, if my grandpa doesn't have anything going on, Kylie's not going to mind giving me a ride to your place. What is Kacee doing at this point? She's trying to change locations. Because if she changes locations, if the plan has to occur at Meggan's house, then Kacee can deflect a lot easier. Meggan knows that, though. Okay, my dad can watch Porter tomorrow morning. So she's coming over at this point. Meggan's coming over the morning of August 12th. At that point, the plan is set. And this is another important one. August 12th, morning of. I'll be there in just a few minutes. Do you want to take some promethazine when I get there so that you are asleep when this is happening? Again, that message warrants emphasis. This is not vague suicide talk anymore. This is preparation for a controlled event. An event that Meggan apparently is expecting Kacee to be asleep for. What does that suggest? Is Kacee doing it herself? No. So you're asleep while it's happening. And again, this preparation follows Kacee's statement that she has already drawn up the syringes. Now let's switch gears. Why would Meggan want Kacee dead? Well, we've heard testimony about it. She believed Kacee's death would solve her financial crisis. Money explains why Meggan crossed this final line. Starting in 2023, Meggan's texts to Kacee show escalating desperation about money. Remember Exhibit 123. This is September of 2023. Meggan says she had to throw out the food from her freezer because it broke and they're going to be eating canned beans. Kacee responds that she wishes she had money to give Meggan and feels guilty she has not passed because the life insurance policy would sure make Meggan's life easier. Remember Exhibit 125. This is October of 2023. Meggan texts Kacee, Mitch's child support doubled. We get to 2024, and then Meggan's financial pressure is really escalating. Exhibit 126. This is January of 2024. I'm going to lie down and turn my phone off for a while. I am an absolute mess. I lost my job this morning. I'm sick about it. We are going to lose everything, Case. Our house, Mitch's stupid truck, our lives here. I'm feeling so hopeless and so discouraged. What am I going to do? I'm so tired of giving my heart and soul and always being hurt so deeply. I can't keep doing it. What am I going to do? I'm so ashamed. I keep losing jobs and people keep hurting me. There must be something wrong. It goes on. This really, really limits my ability to work and provide for my family. It doesn't even matter what happened, it's done, and I'm going to be the cause of us losing everything. Kacee responds, I'm sorry that you've been struggling. How's Mitch doing? Mitch is being sweet and sensitive. But then Meggan says, trade me places, let me go home, and you stay here in this awful place. Remember Exhibit 127. This is February of 2024. She damages her car again. Meggan does. Exhibit 128. If you dying would get me out of this mess and darkness I am in now, I would take it. February of 2024. Remember Exhibit 129. This is, again, February 2024. She says car repairs are going to be $4,000. Remember Exhibit 131. This is July of 2024. There are more car problems. It's overheating. Exhibit 157, July 29th, 2024. Meggan says, I know it sounds so dumb, but I saved up for these pants. I really, really wanted at the buckle, and I'm taking them back now because I can't afford groceries for my family, so it kind of sucks. Kacee, I'm so sorry. How much are the pants? Do you have your Venmo card on you? I sent you $300 and like 20 bucks. Might be less because of the card. They sometimes take a fee. Kacee, again, Meggan, instead of buying groceries for her family, she's opting to spend over $300 on pants, and Kacee Venmos her that money. You heard testimony. Again, we've known that Kacee is paid for a Disneyland trip. She's sending that money a few weeks before her death to Meggan. Dr. Hancock explained that in relationships like this, sure, someone in Meggan's position in this dynamic could be motivated by the caretaking. That could be one explanation. But he said, when I cross-examined him, that they can also be motivated by things like gifts and money. Evidence shows you that Meggan needed money and she was sick of waiting for it. Frankly, Mr. Williams mentioned this in his opening. He said that Kacee was bombarding Meggan with all these texts. And you heard there is a total of 29,000 of them. You don't have all of them. Obviously, that would take weeks for you to go through. But you have a lot, and you'll see that, yeah, Kacee was sending a ton of messages, and Meggan was responding a lot. It was probably exhausting, pretending to be Kacee's friend and believing all these absurd lies. It probably was exhausting, and she was tired of it. She had been doing this for years. She believed the life insurance, she believed the money, and she had to speed up the process. This was Meggan's investment. She had spent years on this investment, and she expected it to be paid out. Remember Exhibit 156. This is July 30th, 2024, so we're getting pretty close to the August 12th. Meggan says she was $28 short at the grocery checkout, and a nice old lady behind her had to help spot her. This financial pressure matters, because alongside that pressure is Meggan's belief that Kacee had a life insurance policy with her as the beneficiary. And you may be wondering why, if Meggan is pretending, or all of these other things that Kacee's telling Meggan are so absurd, why would she believe the life insurance policy? Well, go look, because this is the one claim from Kacee that Meggan actually investigates. She actually vets it. She actually asks some questions. She does some follow-up work on it. And Kacee gives her details that sound pretty credible. Exhibit 30, this is, it looks like legitimate policy stuff at the top. There's a number that is the number that Meggan later gives to John Hancock when she calls after Kacee's death. And here we have, handwriting, I believe, Kylie testified that this is Kacee's. She's signing this over to Meggan way back in, here signed April 28th of 2016. Remember Exhibit 115, this is April of 2020. Kacee reminds Meggan that she's going to receive the policy if Kacee dies. Meggan asks whether it's going to be enough for cosmetic surgery. She goes, can I get a facelift, tummy tuck, eyelid surgery? Let's look at Exhibit 116. And this is, again, in 2020, but Meggan is asking follow-up questions. Here's a random question for you. How on earth did you get approved for a life insurance policy with all your health stuff? Kacee, I bought it back in 2011. I wasn't as sick back then, but when my dad died, I decided to get one too because my dad always tried to make me get one, so I did. She's giving information that sounds like it could be credible. Remember Exhibit 117. This is July of 2020. Meggan presses again. Case, level straight with me, please. Is the policy real? I want to know about this. Kacee insists that the policy is real and says that she wanted Meggan to be surprised when an attorney called her if Kacee ever died to tell her that she would receive over $1 million. Let's look at Exhibit 119. This is October of 2023. Meggan again seeks confirmation. Can I ask you a question I really shouldn't? Is the money thing for real? I don't think Mitch and I are going to be staying together, and I need to know what I'm looking at as far as being able to take care of Porter by myself and how much I'm going to have to work, whether it be 2 or 3 jobs. I'm so sorry to ask, I really am. I feel really uncomfortable asking, actually. Kacee, yes, I promise it's real. I have made sure to keep everything current. I started my policies after my dad died because I knew it would need it with my health problems. I wouldn't lie to you about that. I wanted to surprise you with it. Exhibit 122. I won't go through this whole one. You're free to read it in deliberations, but she's giving legit information or legit sounding information about this policy. She talks about a Mike. Mike's payment he's the one doing the payment, and I got a voicemail, and insurance is so weird to do with it. It's so hard to deal with, but Mike is dealing with this. And let's remember what Meggan does. Not even, I believe, after Kacee died, but she's at that point demanding the paperwork from the family, right? She wants the life insurance paperwork. And then in her police interview, the second interview that you'll have to listen to, she tells them, Mike Dolan is who pays it. He's who you should contact. She even says, he's in Kacee's phone as my love. He's paid $2,000 premium, talk to Mike, because Meggan believes this policy is real. And she goes further. Remember Exhibit 147. This is the call. This is the call on August 23rd, 8 days after her very best friend in the world, more like her sister, what she says in the call, has died. 2 days after her second interview with the police, where they tell her that Kacee having a policy is very unlikely. So she calls. She says, my best friend, more like my sister, has died. The family is not giving me access to the paperwork. She has a policy number, though, and she asks, does that sound like a real policy number? The lady says, yeah, it sounds like one. And then she's told that it's not real. Even her conduct the very day after Kacee is rushed to a hospital, unconscious, and we know that at the hospital her blood sugar level is tested and it's at 14. Meggan's behavior reflects expectation of coming into money. You can look at Exhibit 16, and it's on August 13th, the day after the overdose. When Kacee is in critical condition at the hospital, you can look through what Meggan is searching on her phone. Some of those searches you'll see include flights, vacations to islands, clothing, and jewelry. Why do that, especially when just weeks earlier she had to be spotted $28 at the grocery checkout from an old lady behind her? Is this stuff she regularly searches for? Or does she expect to receive a substantial amount of money pretty soon? Despite years of obvious exaggerations and lies from Kacee, Meggan maintained this relationship, not because she believed it, everything that Kacee was telling her, not because they're actually best friends, but because the evidence shows that the one thing she did believe was the life insurance policy and that Kacee's death could bring her more than $1 million. So again, let's turn back to August 12th, the day that set in motion Kacee's death that ends up following on August 15th. By this point, Meggan has turned years of talk into action. But she already told Kacee back in 2020 100 units would be fatal. She explained in that same text, insulin overdoses are difficult to detect in an autopsy. And in her own text, she spells out the plan, and you can see it. Remember Exhibit 72. She tells Kacee to take extra fast acting. And again, Exhibit 133, which you've seen, but I'm going to emphasize again. Case, honestly, I think with the insulin, someone, should probably be me, should stay with you and continue to give you doses so it will actually stay low and you can pass. Exhibit 135. Case, can you get the insulin? They are keeping you off for 48 hours. Let's try it. I'll come and help you and give it to you regularly to see if it works. And finally, again, remember Exhibit 137, her last message before arriving, telling Kacee to take promethazine so she is asleep while it's happening. This is not compassion, this is planning. This is now execution of the plan. I want to talk about Meggan's control on August 12th. Mark testified that he saw Meggan arrive. He was working from home and he could see from the window that she arrives just before 10 a.m. She stayed until after 9 p.m. that night, just about 11 hours. During that time, I submit to you that evidence supports that Meggan controlled nearly everything. The lights downstairs were dim or off. She later described going over. Renee, her parents, testified that originally Kacee said, or Meggan told them, this is just a girl's day. Haven't seen Kacee in a while, gonna go watch the movies, we're just gonna catch up. Mark testified repeatedly that he thought no one was home though. No voices, no TV, no activity. He said he would have gone down to the basement probably a handful of times to get insulin or use the bathroom, and he didn't know anyone was there. He saw Meggan's truck pull up, and to be fair, she did park in front in that circle driveway. But he testified that he assumed that, yeah, one of her friends came over, and they must have left in Kacee's car from the long driveway that he can't see from his office. He thought that no one was there. Let's look at Exhibit 10, and next to it is Exhibit 176. This is the glucose levels. The first reading is at 9:18 before Meggan arrives. This is Kacee. Undoubtedly, this is Kacee testing her own blood because Meggan's not there yet, but what Kacee's doing is establishing a baseline, and it's within normal levels. It's 87. The defense, I'm guessing, is going to argue and suggested during the trial that she injected insulin before that time, and that there's no way to prove that she didn't do the injection before that time. But the evidence does not support that. Sure, there may be no way for us to absolutely tell whether insulin was injected before 9:18, but Dr. DeSalvo did testify that short-acting insulin has an onset of 15 to 30 minutes. At that early point, the numbers show only a slight downward trend, still within the normal range. More importantly, though, if Kacee is doing what Dr. Hancock suggested, maybe one of the patterns, if she's seeking attention, care, but not death, why on earth would she do the one act that is most likely to give her attention and care? Why would she give herself a dose of insulin before Meggan even arrives, knowing that Meggan's coming over? If she's seeking attention and care, does it make sense that she'd do that before Meggan gets there? For the first few hours, her blood sugars remain low, normal on the low end, but they're trending downwards. And then that pattern changes sharply. Dr. DeSalvo testified that around 12:30, the data shows a trend consistent with a large dose of short-acting insulin, and it's reflected in the rapid drop from 76 to 43 that you see in there. She explained that the sharp decline is not consistent with long-acting insulin, which would have a gradual slope, that this is at least, she can't say exactly how many doses have been administered or how much, but she said for sure, what's consistent around 12:30 is a large dose of short-acting to see that drop that we're seeing. And again, we know anything over 38 units with Kacee's body weight would be fatal, and 100 units would certainly be fatal and would certainly explain why hospital staff was unable to stabilize Kacee's blood sugar for days in the hospital despite continuous dextrose. Dr. DeSalvo testified how insulin works. It sits under your skin and it continues to dissipate in your body. And even with them giving her continuous sugars, they couldn't stabilize her blood sugar over days. Dr. DeSalvo said that would require a huge amount of insulin to be on board. With what we know about the glucose levels, let's look at Exhibit 37. And let's take for argument's sake right now that, let's say, a huge dose was given at 12:30. At 12:47, shortly after that, Meggan texts a number that she identifies as Dr. Masteller, but we know from Detective Farney that this is actually the old number of Kacee's grandfather. This is not Masteller's actual number. Hello, Dr. Masteller. This is Meg, Kacee's friend. I'm just trying to touch base with you and see where we are at with getting the surgery scheduled. Kacee's memory isn't the best, so when I ask her, she isn't always very clear. At the same time, though, Kacee's glucose is dropping, and it's starting to drop more dramatically. DeSalvo said that short-acting insulin causes confusion, sweating, weakness, disorientation. Yet Meggan doesn't tell this doctor that she's supposedly texting that she's even with Kacee. She doesn't make it clear that, hey, I'm with Kacee at the time. She doesn't describe any symptoms. She doesn't ask what to do. She doesn't attempt to verify any DNR that she's supposedly been talked about or told about. She's not seeking medical guidance. She's creating a record. Because what did Lee, her dad, testify to when he later showed up? He said, she told me, I've contacted the hospice doc and we're waiting to hear back. She contacted him all right, but or who she may have thought was him, but obviously it's not his number. But she doesn't give any relevant information about what's happening at the time. Let's talk about the medical emergency. Dr. DeSalvo testified that anything below 50 is hypoglycemia. That's a medical emergency. Before 45, she said it's a critical alert and that every nurse is trained to recognize and know this. The numbers continue. At 12:30, Kacee's at a 76, drops to 43 at 1:43, and at 2 p.m. she drops to a 30. At those levels, Dr. DeSalvo said that the symptoms that we're probably seeing are progressing towards seizure and coma. And you know what? We know that that happened because in Exhibit 27, Meggan is texting her own mom at 1:59, and she says, I'm still here with Kacee. She's not doing too great. I can't even get her to wake up. So we know, at least from this point on, from the defendant's own words, Kacee's out of it. And that's exactly what the medical evidence predicts. Yet Meggan doesn't call 911. There's no evidence that she attempted to contact Dr. Masteller again or contact another physician. She continues to control the conduct and information people receive. Dr. DeSalvo testified that by approximately 1:19, so even before we know that Kacee's unconscious or can't be woken up, Kacee would have been physically unable to test her own blood sugar. And Mark walked you through that process. It's multi-step. It involves, kind of fine motor skills, taking out strips, poking. Dr. DeSalvo said, no, with where Kacee was at 1:19, she wouldn't have been able to do that for herself. But the testing continues for hours. Who's doing it? Meggan. She's the one there. Definitively, Meggan is the one after that point. Maybe Kacee, we know Kacee tested her own at 9:18. Maybe she did a few of the tests earlier when she was physically able to. But at least for 7 hours, Meggan is the one affirmatively doing those tests, just like she said she would. You need somebody to stay with you and keep giving you doses to make sure your sugars stay low. That's exactly what she's doing. And again, no sugar given. House remains quiet, and Meggan is testing to ensure that Kacee's condition is worsening. Kacee's brain and organs are deprived of the glucose and oxygen they need to survive, and a trained nurse understands that the duration of hypoglycemia matters tremendously. Finally, let's look at Exhibit 16. Meggan is repeatedly Googling, and this, 8/12/2024, 4/23, 4/24. We know from her text to her mom that Kacee's been out of it since at least 2. Kacee's Googling how low, Freestyle Libre, which is the type of glucose monitor, how low can it read, multiple times. Let's talk about how the defendant affirmatively blocked Kacee from receiving medical care for as long as possible, because again, as Dr. DeSalvo testified, the length of time that the brain is deprived of glucose and oxygen makes it more and more irreversible. The evidence shows that Meggan does something even more troubling than simply sitting there while Kacee deteriorated. She actively prevented rescue. She invoked a fake DNR, one that, number one, we know never existed. But Dr. DeSalvo explained clearly how DNRs actually work. They don't mean do nothing. They mean no mechanical resuscitation of the heart, no shocking of the heart. She was very clear, patients can still receive oxygen, glucose, antibiotics, comfort care, and emergency treatment. Dr. DeSalvo said that absolutely a trained nurse would know that. And yet the defendant uses this non-existent DNR to affirmatively stop others from helping. Let's talk about when her parents arrive. They arrive around 8:30. Lee testified that he immediately recognizes that Kacee's in a medical crisis. He describes a death rattle. He said he's only heard that sound when people are dying. Dr. DeSalvo testified about the death rattle too and what causes that and how it sounds different than sleep apnea. She said it's a profoundly distressing sound. And yet the defendant told her she has a DNR. Nothing can be done. And that I've already been in contact with the hospice doc. We're waiting to hear back. So Lee's presumption at that time, even though he knows there's a medical crisis, he's not medically trained. Okay, a DNR means I can't do anything. And she's already contacted the doctor. We're just waiting to hear back. But again, we know that Meggan did not give this Dr. Masteller any relevant information that she's waiting to hear back on. She's not contacting again saying, this is Kacee's condition, what do I do? She misrepresented the situation to her own father to actively prevent any intervention. Let's talk about blocking Mark. Around 9 p.m., Mark comes downstairs because Grandpa's been trying to call Kacee. She's not answering, so he asks Mark to go down and check on her. And Mark immediately recognizes, just like Lee had, this is a medical emergency. He says, how long has she been like this? And when he mentioned calling 911, he testified that the defendant came apart. Meggan then calls Kylie, and again, invoked the fake DNR, saying there's a DNR, you can't call 911, trying to get Kylie to stop Mark from calling 911. These are affirmative steps Meggan is taking to prevent 911 from getting involved. Meggan also claims to have held a medical power of attorney, that she is the one that has the responsibility of medical choices over Kacee. But we know again that that's fake, that number one, it didn't exist, and again, this is something that either Dr. Masteller or Dr. DeSalvo testified that, no, that's like legal documents. You'd have to go sign paperwork. She would have had to have seen something. It would have to be in front of a lawyer or a notary. Meggan would absolutely know that she did not have medical power of attorney, and yet she's asserting that she has the responsibility over Kacee's care. You may wonder why the defendant invited her parents over that evening at all. Let's consider that. The evidence suggests that she probably expected Kacee to die much sooner because she originally had dinner plans with them. She called them in, and doing that, she does say around 2, Kacee's not doing well, but she's not leaving because, again, she needs to make sure that Kacee is dead to the best of her ability. And so she calls them in to frame the situation as a spiritual release, consistent with her religious beliefs. She wants Lee to give a blessing of release. Maybe she genuinely believes that will speed up the process. But it also creates plausible deniability because at this point, Kacee's been unconscious for hours. If you're murdering somebody, why on earth would you invite your parents over to the scene? It's not something that it sounds very reasonable, right? But Kacee's unconscious. Kacee can't tell them what's going on. And Meggan already knows that she's going to take steps to try to block any 911 or block any rescue. And Mark didn't know that they were there since, as always, they parked on the street and they entered the house from the back way, the back patio, so no one in the home knew that they were there. And yet the defendant still affirmatively lies to them about what happened. She tells the parents, at some point we're watching movies, we're chit-chatting, Kacee went to the bathroom, she was in there forever, I couldn't get her to come out, I banged on the door, I finally got her to come out, she was all loopy, I had to help her to the bed, I have no idea what happened, she must have taken something. She later repeated that same story to the police in one of the interviews. And her account only began to change once she realized investigators had more evidence. Remember Exhibit 22, this is a recorded call where Meggan says, maybe she needs to say that she knew what Kacee was doing and didn't help her. This shows, consistent with obstructing justice, which I'll get to in a second, Meggan's story is shifting based on the audience that she's talking to and her perceived evidence, what she knows that the police have against her at that point. And at this time, best case scenario for her, because she knows the police had the texts, she knows some different things. Well, best case is that I knew that Kacee was committing suicide and I didn't do anything to help her. But Lee testified that the family did not even learn the full scope of the evidence until shortly before this trial. Lee said that I think up until 2 weeks before this trial, what they believed was still the bathroom story, that Kacee must have taken something, Meggan had no idea what, and she just helped her to bed. Let's talk about EMS and how Meggan blocked that. Defendant left the residence before EMS arrived, providing them no information that could have assisted quicker treatment of Kacee. And the defense attorney, Mr. Williams, brought this up, that this was because Kylie had just angrily, she used choice words, she swore at her, she said, "I'm gonna ruin you," she accused her of murder. And then he introduced this idea of panic, that if you're in a panic, you're not behaving rationally, you're doing things that you normally maybe wouldn't, or that you know that you shouldn't do. But what does she do? Sure, fine, that could explain her leaving the home, but she doesn't leave the scene. Lee and Renee testified that they got in the car, drove a little bit up the street, and watched for about 20 to 30 minutes to see what would happen because Meggan was so concerned about Kacee at that point. If she were truly concerned, she could have approached EMS without anyone in the house, without Kylie, Mark, anyone knowing that she was still there. She could have approached EMS outside and given critical medical information that could have allowed them to treat Kacee earlier, to know what was going on with Kacee earlier, but she didn't. DeSalvo said that with a blood sugar as low as 14, minutes matter in saving. And yet Meggan affirmatively chose not to give EMS information. I'm going to very briefly address the investigation because we heard a lot about it in trial, and I'm guessing that Mr. Williams is going to spend some time on it in his closing. Was the investigation perfect here? No. In hindsight, could some things be done differently? Yeah. Is that probably true of every investigation? Yes. Let's remember how this case began. It was dispatched as a medical call. By the time law enforcement understood that they were dealing with either suicide or foul play, the scene had already been disturbed. The patient was still alive, EMS was down there, things were being disturbed, and even the defense's own expert, he seemed to think that's reasonable. Yes, obviously you deal with a patient that's alive before you start preserving the scene. Detective Farney testified that she followed the evidence where it led, and she did collect some critical physical evidence. There was a syringe found on the bedroom floor that, granted, EMS had moved to the side table because it's a syringe and they're, working on Kacee. It's a small space. They don't want to step on a syringe, so they did move it. Although it wasn't found until a few days later, there's an insulin vial found in the outside patio trash, wrapped in a rag, and then hidden inside a soda box, missing approximately 100 units. Let's talk about that vial, because it was tested. It was collected and tested, and granted, it wasn't found until a few days later when Mark went to empty the trash, and had he not stepped down on that soda box to compact it, to throw it away, probably never would have been found. But he did find it, and he called Farney, and she told him, take it out, set it up, and whatever you think of whether this was a smart idea, let's think about what we know about that. Mark took out the items, set them up, and it was photographed, and he sent it to Farney. So for sure, we know that vial was handled at least twice, even in the home. We know that someone wrapped it in a towel, put it in the soda box, put it in the outside trash. We know that Mark, a few days later, found it, took it out, set it out for a picture to be taken, and then I think he testified that Farney told him to put it in a bag so she could collect it later. So it's handled by people, it's being moved. And yet testing revealed no detectable prints or DNA on that vial. This matters because it shows something pretty simple. People can handle objects and still leave no forensic trace. There may be many possible reasons for that. Prints may not have been deposited, they may have been wiped away, or an item may have been handled by someone who might have reason to be wearing gloves. Might that be a nurse? Even if the Fanta box, Mr. Williams made a big deal about this, the Fanta box not collected, it wasn't collected. What could that have told us? Well, let's assume it was. Let's assume that we even find prints on it. It could have contained multiple innocent prints. Kacee's, it's her drinks, you know, that's what she drank. Her prints are probably on the box. Mark's may have been there. The Smith's checkout clerk fingerprints may have been there. Perhaps even the defendant from ordinary contact inside the home. Maybe she grabbed a Fanta for Kacee and touched the box. Does that tell us, does that answer anything really truly significant about the case? The flaws in this investigation, regardless of what they are, they don't change what we do know. That Kacee died from an insulin overdose. Other drugs present in her system would not independently cause her death. We know for sure that the defendant was present for nearly the entire day. And we know from the defendant's own texts that the plan had been building for years. Those messages, ladies and gentlemen, hold more evidentiary value than any fingerprint or lab result. They show intent, they show preparation, they show control. This case is about whether the defendant caused Kacee's death. Even if you believe Kacee sometimes talked about suicide, the real question is what she actually intended and what the defendant chose to do. Again, this was not compassion, this was escalation. This was a deliberate blocking of rescue. That is homicide. Now let's look at the law. Sorry, I'll try to speed things up. I know you've been going forever. Instruction 32 that the judge gave you. This is count 1, aggravated murder. And these are the elements, and I suggest that you treat them kind of like a checklist. You have to find all of these beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'll talk about that standard in a minute. But basically that means that you have to be firmly convinced of each of these elements before you can find guilt. So treat it like a checklist. The defendant, Meggan Sundwall. We know this is Meggan Sundwall. Multiple people identified her on the stand. We know that the person that we have is the right Meggan Sundwall. This is Meggan Sundwall. And I'll come back to 2 or 3 because that's what this case really comes down to. But under one or more of the following aggravated circumstances, homicide was committed for pecuniary gain. There's no requirement that the money actually had to be real or that it had to be paid out, but the evidence is pretty clear that if Meggan was the cause, that it was for money. You could check that one off. And then also, we know that it was committed by means of administration of a substance in a lethal amount, dosage, or quantity. We know that Kacee was given a lethal amount of insulin. So you can check that one off. The law only requires you to be unanimous about at least one of them, but I would argue that the evidence supports you finding both of them. So this comes down, and again, intentionally or knowingly, you have definitions about what those mean. If Meggan is the cause, then yes, they talked about it for years. The intent, their intent, what Meggan knew to be the result of what happened is that Kacee is going to be dead. That was the intent, that's the knowledge that Meggan has. So let's talk about causation. That's in instruction 38. It's part of some of these other definitions, but cause the death means the defendant's conduct was a substantial factor in bringing about the death of another, even if it can be shown that some other factor also contributed in a substantial degree to the death, as long as the other factor was foreseeable. The death would not have occurred but for the defendant's conduct, and a reasonable person would have foreseen that defendant's conduct would have resulted in death. The defendant acted, Kacee died, the defendant caused that death. You do not have to be unanimous, I want to be clear about this. You only have to be unanimous that Meggan, of course all of these other elements, but the cause, you only have to be unanimous that she caused. The exact mechanism of how the cause happened, you don't have to be unanimous about. You only have to be unanimous that she caused the death. She could have been a substantial factor if the death is foreseeable. It does not require her to be the sole cause. You do not have to agree on every mechanism of how she caused it. I want to talk about manslaughter, which is the lesser included that is an option for you here, and that's in instruction 33. Sorry, let me get my papers together. And this one here is the aiding suicide. Here, again, you have to be beyond a reasonable doubt firmly convinced of every one of these elements for you to find this. And again, treat it like a checklist if you want. Again, we know Meggan Sundwall. But here, with knowledge that another individual intended to commit suicide or attempt suicide, intentionally aided the individual to commit suicide. I want to hit the aiding really fast. You have that in your definitions. The same, I believe it's 38. Aiding means the act of providing the physical means. Providing there, in turn, you look at providing means to administer, prescribe, distribute, or dispense. I would argue that aiding here, it could mean that she went and grabbed a vial of insulin from the fridge, brought it to Kacee. It could mean that she drew up a vial or a syringe herself, handed it to Kacee. It could mean that she gave the injection herself. Aiding could mean any of those because she's providing the physical means into Kacee's body. But this one, number 2, with knowledge that another individual intended to commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide, I would argue to you that the evidence does not support that. Look over those messages. And certainly, I want to be clear. If you find this, if you do believe that Kacee was suicidal and that Meggan believed her and that she aided, and you find all of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, this is the correct verdict. And I want to be very clear. Mr. Williams, the defendant, they have no burden to prove this. So don't expect that anything that they have to say or put up, that it's their burden to prove that this happened. But if you believe all of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt, this is the correct verdict to find. But I submit to you, I argue to you, that the evidence does not support this because Meggan did not have knowledge that Kacee intended to commit suicide because Kacee did not intend suicide. I've already covered that at length. Kacee was not suicidal. She may have pretended it, she may have staged it, she may have made it look like it was, but it was dramatic, it was fantastical, and it was unbelievable. And this here, right here, requires Meggan to have knowledge that Kacee had that intent. When you review all the text messages, I argue to you that there's no way that Kacee or that Meggan would have known that Kacee actually intended suicide. What this case is, it's different, it's far more serious. Aiding suicide is a different relationship to death than murder. Aiding suicide means that Kacee is the principal cause of her death. She's the principal actor, and Meggan merely aided in some way. Murder means that Meggan is the principal cause. So ask yourselves again, who was in control? The evidence does not support that Kacee intended suicide, or even that the defendant believes she did. The defendant herself texted Kacee, again, Exhibit 132, just a few weeks before August 12th. I don't think you want to try and off yourself, and I completely understand that. That's on July 27th of 2024. In her second police interview that you can go back and listen to, around the 40-minute mark, she tells police that she didn't believe Kacee was really suicidal. She talked about it a lot, but I didn't actually believe she was suicidal. Consider the physical evidence. So a bunch of syringes were found, but I'm going to talk about the 2 primary ones. The one on the floor that EMS moved to the table, and then the one found in the Fanta box days later outside. We heard from FBI scientist Chad Moore. And to be fair, Mr. Williams pressed him on this, and he did say that there are certain things that could degrade insulin or change its properties, its chemical structure. But he testified he saw no protein remnants or degradation products he would expect to see if insulin had ever been in those syringes. Even after cross-examination, he maintained that he would still expect to see some trace. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence supports a simple conclusion. Those syringes never contained insulin. Even if the other syringes in the house, we know that Mark ended up finding one in the closet after he had to pull up the carpet after the flood. Why would that be there? If Kacee is suicidal, or we heard evidence of other syringes found in Kyle's room in a desk, in another room down in the basement. If Kacee's suicidal, why would she use her last moments or time of consciousness to go hide the mechanism that she's using to kill herself? Why would she do that? Why would she hide a vial of insulin? Why would she wrap it in a rag, put it in a soda box, put it in the outside patio trash that really only she used, expecting no one else to find it? Why would she do that if she's suicidal? Why would she care? Even if she were trying to maintain the life insurance story, that still makes no sense because guess what? She already told the defendant that the policy covered suicide. Exhibit 153. Back in 2023, Kacee says, my life insurance does cover suicide because when I signed up for it, it said I had to go at least 2 years without doing that, but it would be covered after that. So someone controlled that evidence. Someone hid or removed the syringes that were actually used, that actually contained insulin. Someone wrapped that vial, punctured 13 times, suggesting multiple doses given, in a rag and placed it in a box in the outside trash. If Kacee intended suicide, again, I maintain there would be no reason to hide the instrument. But someone committing murder would have reason. Kacee's stories were fantastical. Her lies were obvious. The defendant, a trained nurse, could see that. Kacee was desperate for attention, particularly from the defendant. Kacee was seeking reassurance, probably even someone to stop her, to tell her her life mattered. Instead, the defendant pushed. Obstructing justice, I'll cover quickly. It's instruction 34. We know that Meggan deleted texts. Agent Sitsinger talked about that. They're not routinely deleted. Her phone's not set to that. They're about insulin, they're about life insurance, they're about suicide. And he said that one of the messages, and you'll see that exhibit, it has a heart being removed off one of the messages, and it tells you the date that happened. It's August 17th, 2024, one day after Meggan's first police interview, when she agreed to provide her phone but said that she needed to wait a few days to do that. Why? Because she's deleting evidence. Obstruction can also be based on lying to police, and again, we see that, and you'll hear it. She told them originally in her first interview, I have no idea what happened. It's the bathroom story that she told her parents. I have no idea what happened. She went to the bathroom. I have no clue. And then she makes that call. I think I need to say that I knew what Kacee was doing and I didn't help her. So obviously she lied to the police. You have to be unanimous. Again, that's one of those ones that you have a special findings form. You have to be unanimous at least 2-1. You have to agree on at least one, but the evidence supports both. For years, there was dramatic talk, escalating talk, stories that grew more and more extreme, but nothing actually happened. Kacee never did anything, nothing irreversible, until Meggan stepped in. This wasn't chaos, it was structured, it was directed, it was controlled. This was betrayal of Meggan's specialized knowledge and human trust as a friend. Meggan Sundwall did not just idly watch as Kacee declined. She actively controlled whether Kacee lived or died. Meggan Sundwall caused the death of Kacee Terry with a lethal amount of insulin, and she did it for the money. We ask that you convict of aggravated murder. Thank you.
Could we have a short break while we change?
We could certainly do that.
Thank you very much.
I think that may help the jury too.
There are other reasons.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you were still under the previous admonition that I've given you on a regular basis. You are still not to discuss this case with each other or do any research on your own about the claims or the parties. We're going to take a short break. Let's try 15 minutes. We'll come back and finish up.
All rise, jury.
Please be seated. Counsel, let's try a quarter after.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.